Good morning, everyone. And I am Andrea Spencer, and I'm Vice President of Communications here at ElderSource. Welcome to our first workshop. Alex, if you can advance the slide to the housekeeping items, I would appreciate it. We're going to go over a few things regarding this particular workshop. And for all of you who are attending, thank you. This session is being recorded and it's going to be posted to our website for those who are not able to attend or need to jump off early. And you can watch it in its entirety again today at 5:30, as well as anytime if you log onto our website, which is myeldersource.org. I'm asking everyone to remain muted and your cameras off for the duration of the conference so we can focus on the speakers and their content and not be distracted by any outside noises. That would be helpful. You can, I would recommend that you turn on the speaker view, which is up in the upper right-hand corner, and you'll have a better view of the speaker and all the other little boxes would go off to the side. Please type any questions into the chat box. We are going to have our Q&A at the very end. I will be retrieving the questions. If everyone can please mute, that would be awesome. Thank you. Please put your questions into the chat and I will retrieve them and we'll pose those questions to our speakers today. If you need the closed caption, if anybody needs that, you can look at the top of your screen under view options and enable the closed caption if that's helpful to you as well. Due to the number of attendees, we may, on occasion have some technical difficulties. So I ask for your patience and again, your grace and understanding that, we're still into the Zoom era. So I am going to mute myself as well as take myself off camera. And I have the pleasure of introducing our two facilitators today who will kick off the program. Linda Levin, who is CEO of ElderSource, and our new and wonderful friend, actually, she's not new, she's been working with us on different things, Cheryl Wayland with Sage. So welcome. And again, please keep yourself on mute and cameras off. And we're ready to go. Have a great workshop, everybody.
Great. Thank you, Andrea. Good morning, everybody. I'm Linda Levin. I am CEO of ElderSource, and I want to welcome all of you to this wonderful program. ElderSource is designated by the state of Florida to be the Area Agency on Aging and Aging and Disability Resource Center for 7 counties in Northeast Florida. And it is our mission to help people live and age in their home and community for as long as possible with independence and dignity. That includes all people. So today, and over a series of months, with funding from the LGBTQ Community Fund for Northeast Florida at the Community Foundation for Northeast Florida, we are hosting these series of workshops, Age Your Way, specifically for LGBTQ older adults. So with that, we partnered with Sage, and with us today is Cheryl Wayland from Sage, and I'll let her tell you more about Sage.
Thank you so much, Linda and Andrea, for the warm welcome. SAGE is the country's largest and oldest organization dedicated to improving the lives of lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, queer, and questioning older adults. Our mission is to lead in addressing issues related to LGBTQ+ aging, where we are often the LGBTQ voice and the Aging Network, and the Aging Voice and the LGBTQ+ networks. With headquarters in New York City, SAGE offers 5 innovative senior centers across New York City, care management and housing supports. And nationally, we run SAGE's National Resource Center on LGBTQ+ aging, the National Housing Initiative, SAGE Care Training and Credentialing, the Long-Term Care Equality Index in partnership with the HRC Foundation, national advocacy, and growing networks of strategic partnerships across the country. It is our honor to co-host this webinar series with ElderSource. I'd like to highlight that ElderSource has long been recognized for their commitment to LGBTQ+ older adult outreach and service inclusion. So thank you, ElderSource.
Thank you, Cheryl. It's been great working with you over these years.
Yeah, thank you.
Very important work. So today's workshop specifically offers vital information on understanding and planning for legal decisions necessary for living your best life as an LGBTQ older adult. Over the next 90 minutes, our experts will discuss how to protect your assets, honoring your end-of-life wishes and nursing home and housing rights. Today, we have three fantastic subject matter experts. Shelly Skeen from senior legal, she's a senior legal attorney from Lambda Legal in Dallas. Elizabeth Schwartz, a Florida attorney and activist based out of Miami. And Amity Overall Laid, director with the National Long-Term Care Ombudsman Resource Center. And we're going to get started with Shelly. Shelly?
Sure. Grateful to be here today. Thank you to Sage and ElderSource. And so let me just tell you a little bit about myself. Shelly Skeen, I use she, her pronouns. I work for Lambda Legal Education and Defense Fund. And what we do is we work for full and lived equality for LGBTQ people and people who are living with HIV. We are the oldest and largest national organization that does that. And we are focused on, at least for this presentation, but really across the board, from birth to families, to parenting, to employment, to seniors. And so again, grateful to be here today. We have a help desk that you can access either online, and they're going to be the online URL that will be available after the end of our presentation today, and or for folks who don't have access to the internet or would rather just make a phone call, we also have a phone number. And our help desk, we have 4 full-time attorneys who answer calls. So if you feel like you have been unfairly treated, please contact our help desk. And then what happens is we have offices across the country, Chicago, New York, Washington, D.C., Atlanta, Dallas, and LA. And your contacts to us get funneled to the attorneys in the particular region. And we look at the issue that's affecting you and see if there's a way that we can help you, or we can send you to one of the attorneys in our cooperating network. So next slide. Oh, let me give you a quick overview of what I'm going to talk about. I'm going to talk a little bit about language. I'm going to talk a little bit about statistics that affect our community. And then I'm also going to talk a little bit about what the law is. So with our first slide, let's go through some language that affects the LGBTQ plus community, and I'm going to explain to you what all of that means, LGBTQ plus. And so here's what we know. Sexual orientation, it is who you have an enduring attraction to. So it's who you're attracted to romantically, emotionally, and also physically. So that is sexual orientation. It is different than gender identity. Gender identity is your internal felt sense of self, and whether you identify with either being female or male, neither sex, or somewhere in between, or some third sex or gender. And so a lot of folks, as you all probably know, identify as two-spirit, or some of the words that we're going to keep going through a little bit further in is what I'm going to call gender fluid, gender queer, and non-binary. People who are gender fluid, gender queer, non-binary, another word is gender expansive. Those are folks who do not necessarily identify with the sex that they were assigned at birth, and they may find themselves somewhere on the spectrum between male or female, or both, or some third gender. And then gender expression, what is that? That is how we present to the world. So for example, do you present in a more feminine looking way? And that would be, based on norms and stereotypes, or perhaps more male or somewhere in between. So that's what gender expression is. And then transgender, again, it's pretty similar to gender identity, but it's an umbrella term when you're looking at people whose gender identity and or their gender expression is different than those norms that we find in society. And so next slide, please. All right, gender transition. This is for folks who may not identify with the sex that they were assigned at birth. And so they may want to transition from that sex to another sex. And so if they do that, there are multiple ways that you can do that. And I think there are a lot of myths around that. But when I say myths around that, there's this perception that in order to transition from the sex you were assigned at birth to another sex or gender, you need to have surgery. And that's simply not the case. You can change your social appearance, so that gender expression. You can perhaps go on hormones so that you begin to look a little bit different from a physical standpoint. And then you could also do surgery, but that is based on that individual person and what feels right to them. And so there is no there's no requirement for surgery. And I think there's some misperceptions around that. So just to clear that up. We'll talk a little bit more as we go through X markers, which is a new option that you can get on a passport in the United States. And that's based on a long, lengthy Lambda Legal case that we filed about 7 years ago called Dana Zim. And we'll talk a little bit more about that when we get into identity documents. But what that case does is now says that for folks who identify as non-binary or gender expansive, as neither female nor male, you can simply self-attest and say, this is my identity. I am gender neutral, and you can get a passport with that on it. And there's some new guidance from the Biden administration that I'll talk about as we get a little bit further in this portion of the talk. So a transgender woman is a woman who is assigned the sex of male at birth. A transgender man is a man who is assigned the sex of female at birth. Cisgender is someone like me. I identify as cisgender. My sex assigned at birth was female, and I identify as a female. So that's when your gender identity is in alignment with the sex you were assigned at birth. And then the term queer. So for folks who are older, like me, I might have gotten my AARP card and am frankly pretty happy about that because there are great discounts, especially on rental cars. So for people who are older, the term queer can be it's an inflammatory term. It can be derogatory. Some of us remember back in the days when that was a slur against folks that were like us. So I'm going to be cognizant of that and want you all to be cognizant of that. However, for people who are younger, right now, the term queer is really the term that they tend to prefer if they have a sexual orientation that does not match the sex, for example, they were assigned at birth. And or if they also, for example, identify as non-binary or gender diverse. So that's an overarching term that the younger people tend to use now. And so next slide, please. All right, let's talk a little bit about who is LGBT in the United States. What do we know? All right, we know that about 5.6% of our population identifies as LGBTQ. And what does that translate into? That translates into over 13 million people. And those 13 million people, and I went and looked this up, is more than the population of about 43 of our states. So just to kind of give you an example, it's more than the population of the entire state of New Jersey. What do we see race-wise? We see about 58% of folks are white, identify as white, about 21% as Latino or Latina, about 12% as Black, The average age is about 37 years old for LGBTQ folks, but for people who are not LGBTQ, it's more like about 47. So there's about a 10-year difference there. Financially, what do we see in our community? We see 25% of us nationally do not have health insurance, and then 27% of us are food insecure, and 25% of us make less than $24,000. If you add on top of that what I'm going to call BIPOC status, so people who are Black, Indigenous, and people of color, then those numbers, when you start looking at the lack of health insurance, more food insecurity, poverty, and we'll talk about this a little bit more further down, you see higher numbers. So you see those intersectional identities showing up in ways that make it so that if you're a person living with a disability and you are LGBTQ and you are Black, then more likely than not, you're going to have much less ability to have basic access to services, whether it's healthcare, housing, meals, and so forth. So we'll talk a little bit more about that as we go forward. So transgender folks, that's our umbrella term. For transgender folks, we have about 1.4 million transgender folks over the age of 18. We have about 150,000 youth between the ages of 13 and 17. We know that between the ages of 18 and 23, we've got about 15.9% of our young people in that age bracket identify as non-binary or gender expansive. Just talked a little bit about identity documents for the purposes of folks who are non-binary and want to go get a passport that has an X or a gender neutral marker on it. That's all available. There's about 23 states that allow that, but most states don't allow that. And then overall, as far as identity documents that match who people are as transgender people, only about 66% of transgender people have identity documents that match who they are. And so why is that so critical and important? Well, if you don't have identity documents that match who you are, what that does is it means it's much harder for you to go get a loan. It's much more likely that it's going to be hard for you to go get housing. It means that there's going to be a discrepancy when you go to get health care. If you get pulled over by a police officer and you are transgender and Black, then you're more likely to have a bad outcome from that experience, whether you get charged with a crime and or some sort of violence that occurs. So not having identity documents is really, really important. Economics, we know about 29% of people who are transgender live below the poverty level. And then when you look at, if you add on people who are BIPOC, we're looking at more like 40 to 45%. And for Black transgender women, the average age, because of the inability to access services, the average age or lifespan is 35 years old. So those are some sobering statistics, and I don't mean to be doom and gloom, but I think it helps inform our conversation today, because for older LGBT people, 41, and we're going to talk a little bit more about this, we need those access to services. And when you are marginalized, you just simply don't have that equal ability to even access the services. And if you can access them, then getting them is still harder. Non-binary folks, about 1.2 million in the United States. And of those folks, about 52% identify as cisgender and about 48% identify as transgender. So that gives you a little bit of feeling for that. Next slide, please. All right, let's talk about Florida quickly, and I think I'm doing good on my time here. What do we know in Florida? We've got about 886,000 folks, or 4.6% of the Florida population, that identifies as LGB. And that is about, when you look at national averages across the country, usually you're seeing somewhere between, in any individual state, between 4.2 and about 4.9%. Washington, D.C. has the most number of folks who identify as LGBTQ. Race, what do we see? Pretty similar to the national numbers I just cited to you. 51% identify as white, Latino and Latina about 30%, and then Black folks about 12%. And for the folks who don't fit in into those categories, I'm not trying to erase you by not including you. It's just that those numbers are a little bit lower and different, but that is information that'll be available to you after our talk today. Gender, we're seeing about 48% male and about 52% female. And then the average age in Florida for LGBT people is 40, but for the overarching population, it's 50. So it's a little bit higher. Financially, we're seeing 21% are not insured, 27% food insecure, and then 27% of folks make less than $24,000. So those are some pretty high numbers. Trans folks, again, I'm kind of reading this slide, but it's also here for you. About 0.6% of our population, and it mirrors what we see nationwide. It's about 0.6% of our population. About 100,000 people over the age of 18 identify as trans. And then for young people, it's a little bit higher percentage, 0.78%. And then identity documents in Florida tends to be about the same as what we see nationally. Only about 66% of folks have documents that match who they are. And then when it comes to economics, we're seeing for trans folks, and these are trans folks as a whole, not including the intersectional identities of being BIPOC or having a disability, we're seeing about 45% of folks who are not insured, and then 63% of people make less than $10,000. So next slide, please. All right, so let's talk about seniors more specifically, and these are national numbers. What do we know? We know that right now we've got the baby boomers. I'm one of them, and we are moving through and getting a little bit older. And so we have about 3 million people right now who are LGBT. And then as we go through, and by 2030, now I'm going to say the SAGE number is different. The SAGE number is 2050. So I'm going to go with a SAGE number that says 7 million LGBT seniors by 2050. Seniors, what do we see? We see that we're about twice as likely to live alone. We're 4 times less likely to have kiddos. We're half as likely to have someone to call. 41% of us have a disability. 68% of us have experienced verbal harassment in our lifetimes. We've also experienced physical harassment. 30% of us don't have a will. And Elizabeth is going to talk about this as we go forward and why it's so critical to have estate planning documents and to name beneficiaries as we age. 36% of us don't have a healthcare power of attorney. And what does that mean? Power of attorney, you designate somebody to step into your shoes to make decisions for you if you can't. And then we also know that about 21% of folks who are transgender, non-binary, and or who are LGB, don't tell their doctors who they really are. And then for trans folks, we've got about 22% of trans folks that won't even go to a doctor because they don't feel like they have the money for it. And then we've got about 13% that say of LGBT people who say that they have experienced inferior health care. I'm going to tell you that that number, I believe, is actually much higher than that, given what we normally see, at least in my practice. Next slide, please. All right, I've got 4 minutes, so I'm going to try to stay on track. But what do we know more about seniors more broadly? I think based on our last slide, without me reading this to you, the gist is that for people who are LGBT seniors, we have less social support. We tend to have our families that we have made over the course of our lifetimes. We may be, which would mean our LGBT peers, we may be estranged from our own families. And so because of that, what we're seeing is LGBT people are aging at the same time, and those people that we would look to be our caregivers are aging with us. And as they become older and less able to take care of themselves, and remember, I just said that about 41% of us have a disability, we're not able to take care of ourselves. So we need that access to services. We don't have families to rely on because we haven't had kids. We didn't have the ability to get married. We didn't have the ability to adopt as easily. And so the overarching issue for LGBT seniors is not being able to access healthcare, housing, and benefits as our heterosexual counterparts. And so next slide, please. All right, and so where do we see discrimination? Really, I hate to say it, but as we age, we see it pretty much everywhere. Senior centers, independent and assisted living facilities, long-term care, housing, apartments, we see it in healthcare. Senior centers, we did a study here in Texas, and what I know about senior centers is that the senior centers that we went and interviewed said, well, we don't have any gay people that live here. We don't have any transgender people that live here, when they did. And so as we age, that's something else that has happened to us. We have tended to go back into the closet because when we seek access to these services, we feel like we might be more discriminated against based on who we are. And so we may go into the closet, and that can be harmful for the services and benefits that we need to access. So for long-term care facilities, let me just point out hospitals. We know about 13% of them are religiously affiliated. And then residential communities for folks who are aging, including long-term care, over 82% of them are religiously affiliated. And what we've seen, you can go to the next slide. I'll just talk about this just briefly. What we've seen in the last 2 years, and really especially, well, really the last 3 years, the United States Supreme Court has continued to expand religious liberties and religious exemptions, and has allowed, should I say, folks who have a religiously based affiliation to discriminate. And that looks like over time, I'm just showing this as an issue for us, given that we're seeing the expansion of religious liberties, then for those places, hospitals, those 14%, 13% of hospitals, and the over 82% of long-term care facilities and residential facilities, we may be seeing more of an issue of discrimination, which is why it's so critical when Liz starts talking that we do what we can to take care of our estate planning needs, and that we designate people to make decisions for us. Sometimes that's hard because we don't have a family to make those decisions. Would be a friend of ours, but then if they become incapacitated, who's going to make those decisions? Liz will talk about that. And so I'm just going to go through this slide quickly. I would implore everyone to go look on Lambda Legal's website. If you were in a long-term relationship with a partner and that partner passed prior to marriage equality, which was in 2015, it may be that you are eligible for Social Security survivors benefits if that person has passed away prior to Obergefell. If you got married right around the time of Obergefell, or you were able to get married in your state, for example, in 2014, but your partner, spouse did not live the full 9 months that's required to obtain Social Security survivors benefits, then as a result, you can get those benefits now. So as a result of 2 Lambda Legal cases, and there's going to be FAQs that we will provide to you after this presentation, you can go seek those benefits. And so for folks in the LGBTQ community who are aging, who historically over the course of our lives, we've made less money, We may have not gotten married, so therefore we haven't maybe built up all of the things that we would build up over the course of a lifetime if we were heterosexual folks. Now, Social Security survivors benefits are critical for our community. And so if you were in a long-term relationship, the key here is that if you were and your partner passed away prior to marriage equality or did not live the full 9 months, you can now go and seek those benefits. So please go and look on our website, and we've got some FAQs to show you how to do that. And I'll say one more thing, Biden executive orders. We have seen a series of executive orders out of the Biden administration with respect to race equity, with respect to SOGI, so sexual orientation, gender identity, gender expression, and also for people specifically who are transgender who want to go and update their Social Security Administration account to show what their gender identity is. All you have to do, again, is self-attest. You can go do that. That will help you access all of the benefits that the Social Security Administration can give to folks as we age. So I'm not going to go through the rest of the stuff on the slide, but I wanted to say Lambda Legal is here. We're a resource for you going forward. And one other thing, we've got some really great case law that now says that they're under the Fair Housing Act, under the HUD Equal Access Act. Both of those look at housing and making sure that there's no discrimination in housing and getting loans, that no longer can you be discriminated against based on sexual orientation and gender identity. So that is some good case law out there, and the same with employment. So that is all I have for y'all, and thank you very much.
Thank you, Shelly, so much. And now we're excited to introduce Elizabeth Schwartz. I just have to say that Elizabeth is a well-known Florida attorney and LGBTQ plus activist, and is the past co-chair of the SAGE Board of Directors. So just really excited to have Elizabeth joining us today.
Thanks, Cheryl. Thanks everyone for welcoming me. And again, great presentation, Shelly, and thanks so much to ElderSource for centering our community, not just now as we head into Pride Month, but all the time. So thank you for that. Again, my name is Elizabeth Schwartz, she, her, hers pronouns. I'm an attorney and activist. My office is down here in Miami, but I work with folks all throughout the state of Florida. So I'm happy to help you with any of your legal needs. Well, not any. My practice is estate and family. And I do a lot of work in the trans community as well, and I'm happy to answer questions offline later. But for now, I want to talk about some issues that have been highlighted already, and I think are really important to. Oh, oops! I meant to start my timer. Sorry. As I said earlier, that lawyers, we can go on and on. So I'm going to try to keep it to 15 minutes if I can. Maybe go over a teensy bit. Okay. So let's dive in. Estate planning protections. Now, let me say this. Whether or not you marry, it's still very important to have estate planning. I find it infuriating. I talk to lots of LGBTQ folks, and they're like, finally, we can marry. We don't have to worry about all those wills and powers of attorney and stuff anymore. It's like, there are straight estate planning lawyers, and straight people need estate planning. So you absolutely still need estate planning. Marriage is not the answer. You still need a plan B. What happens if your spouse predeceases you or is disabled? And of course, quite obviously, what if you are single or if you are unmarried? It's critically important to articulate in writing your intentions. Again, your plan A, your plan B, that kind of thing. And as you'll see in the materials that are not up on the slides, but which have been provided to you, I'm also a believer that marriage is not for everyone. Yes, my wife and I have been together 20 years. We married 13 years ago, but that was after consultation. And I think a lot of us, especially those of us who came up in the feminist movement, we understand that marriage, like women were property. The history of the institution is not a great one for women. So I think a lot of us who came up thinking, I'm never going to get married, find it a little frustrating that there are assumptions that if you have a partner, if you're in a committed relationship, then you must marry. And if you didn't marry, then you must not be committed. I have a whole book that I wrote kind of dedicated to exactly that. And the point being of this, before I do a legal guide to marriage, gay and otherwise, the point being that there are lots of automatic rights and responsibilities associated with marriage that maybe you don't want. Maybe you don't want automatic rights on death and divorce. Maybe you have a business or children or reasons that you maybe don't want your partner to get everything from you. Maybe you want to protect your 401k, which would otherwise be divided up in a divorce. That part of it that is marital. So absent a prenuptial agreement, or in many states also a postnuptial agreement, if you're married, if you don't modify those defaults in the law, you could end up being in trouble. So marriage isn't for everyone, but the point is that if you do decide to marry, or if you don't decide to marry, you need an estate plan. And I'm going to go through kind of the basics right now. The first, everyone needs a will. Absolutely everyone. I can't tell you my 25 years of doing this, how many times people have said to me, oh, like, I don't have an estate. I don't need a will. I don't have like stuff. You do. Even if it's like your pen and your heirloom copy of Before I Do, you want to make sure you provide specific directions for where all of that goes. And that's really important. It's also really important to name in a will who's going to administer your estate. In Florida, that's called a personal representative. In other states, it's an administrator, executor. So that's really very, very important. No matter what you have, you need to say who gets it, and then a plan B. And let me just put out a plug, not only because I'm here presenting with my longtime friends at Lambda Legal, you also might have charitable intentions. We've got, in this Stonewall generation, those of us who came up in the time of Stonewall, there's going to be a massive amount of wealth transferred at our death. And you might want to think about benefiting some of the organizations that have benefited you so much in your life, that have gotten us to the place where we can even decide, hey, maybe I'm going to marry, maybe I'm not going to marry. And those nonprofit organizations desperately count on our funds. So consider leaving a legacy to the organizations that have worked so hard to make our lives so much better. And especially, of course, including SAGE. Indeed, I spent 7 years on the SAGE board, and it was the best 7 years of my life. And SAGE does incredible work to benefit LGBTQ older adults, really the world over. And lots of facilities where you might find yourself in your golden years, hopefully in Florida, will have received the SAGE Care training, which is cultural competency training that SAGE has pioneered to make sure that all facilities are inclusive of their LGBTQ folks. So second thing to look at are the titles of your accounts, your deeds. If you want to make sure that those pass to someone at your death, that you can title them properly so that they don't have to go through probate. Probate is the court supervised way of handing your assets over to the next generation. And some people like to avoid probate. Very important to have a durable power of attorney. If there is someone that you trust to be able to do absolutely everything for you, like short of vote and create a new will, powers of attorney are effective when you sign them. There is no more springing power of attorney, which we used to have in Florida, which was like, give us a letter from a doctor and then it'll be effective. So that's very, very important if you have someone that you trust, because they're very, very serious documents. Alex, I'll go to the next slide, please. Thanks. So continued legal protections, again, whether you need them or not, whether you wed or not, everyone needs a healthcare surrogate. That's like access and decision-making in the event that you can't speak for yourself. And that's in a medical context. The power of attorney that was on the slide before, that's only about financial decisions. The healthcare surrogate is about healthcare decisions. And again, for a healthcare surrogate, maybe you have a spouse and maybe that person would be regarded in a hospital, although we're hearing lots of crazy stories with some like faith-based hospitals where they're like, I don't care if you're married, we don't recognize your marriage. We only recognize a biblical marriage, that kind of thing. So even if you're married, you still want to make sure you have these documents. Again, not only because you might encounter some sort of discrimination, and that's like the last moment where you want to try to argue, wait, but Obergefell and my marriage is valid and it's legal nationwide. And you also want to have a plan B. Because again, heaven forbid you and the person that you named, your partner, your spouse, your bestie, heaven forbid you get in a common accident, let's just say. You need to have a plan B. Who would be the person who would come in to make those decisions for you and have access to you secondarily. A living will is, and I should say a healthcare surrogate. Other states call it like a healthcare proxy or a power of attorney for healthcare. There's lots of different ways in which it's known. But in Florida, we call it a healthcare surrogate. Living will is critically important. You might all remember the Terry Schiavo case where a spouse wasn't able to unplug his wife because her parents had a different definition of what mercy meant. And it was a big battle. And one piece of paper would have saved this whole battle, and that would have been a living will. And that is saying that in the event that you are terminal, that you don't want heroic measures to keep you alive. A designation of pre-need guardian is also very important. These three documents together are called advanced directives in Florida law. So a healthcare surrogate, a living will, and a pre-need guardian are advanced directives. And those are documents, keeping track of time, those are documents which you would want to have to, again, state what happens in the event that you can't communicate for yourself. And a guardianship is in the event that you become legally incapacitated over an extended period of time, right? So like coma, Alzheimer's, that's who would manage your financial affairs, this slide doesn't have it fully, but it's also your personal decisions. So guardian of your person and property. So to decide which facility you go in, to make medical decisions for you, that kind of thing. So very important, again, to have a plan, a primary and then a designate. Then this slide is, I should have caught this, I'm sorry. The designation of pre-need guardian for minor child is what item 7 is. And that's if you have a small child, that's if you become incapacitated, who would be the guardian of your child. Beneficiary designations, making sure that your accounts are titled properly. I can't tell you how often I've got folks who still have their ex on their 401k, and they're shocked when if they pass away that the ex is going to be able to just come in and collect the money because that has never been changed. A cohabitation agreement is important. I mentioned a few minutes ago a prenup. So if you wanted to modify any of those defaults in the law with regard to, again, automatic rights on death and divorce, you can change those with the prenup. If you don't get married, you could sort things out using a cohabitation agreement. So it says kind of who pays for what. If you have a house, let's say, apartment that you're each contributing to, it kind of just says, in the event that we break up, here's how the interest in the home would be divided, that kind of thing. Let's see, next slide, please. And I think this is the last slide for me, and I'm going to add one other point, and then I'll turn it over. So very important, if you're raising a child with a partner, heaven forbid the two of you ever should split up, it's very important that you both have equal parental rights. Or if you are, let's say, the biological or initial adoptive parent, and your partner doesn't have parental rights, if you die, those children could be in the hands of your biological family, which is probably not your intention. So if you're not married, you'd want to do a second parent adoption. If you are married, you would want to do a step parent adoption. So I don't know if this was mentioned in my intro, but I worked on one of the marriage equality cases here in the state of Florida. And thank you, Alex. I have one more slide after this one. I worked on the marriage equality slide in the state of Florida. And when we were polling for plaintiffs, trying to get people to step up and become plaintiffs, so many people were like, I want to get married so that I can have rights to my partner's child. And that's not how it works. if you get married and your partner is a child, you still have to adopt that child. You've got to potentially contend with, if there's another legal parent, you've got to contend with giving notice to that parent, potentially having to get their consent. So marriage doesn't just automatically give you that right. So very, very, very important to understand that. And then I'll just also briefly mention that if you are married, you have a child in your marriage and you're both on the birth certificate, it is still strongly recommended to confirm those parental rights with an adoption. We call it a confirmatory adoption because that's what it is. I'm not going to spend too much time on that in this crowd, but I did want to just flag one last, oh, you can go to the last slide, Alex, thank you. You excellent. Oh, you have more of these. Good, because this is in my handout, and I mentioned, good, this is where I was going. This has been, thanks, Alex. Okay, so this has been added since I've seen the PowerPoint. So this is a handout that I've prepared. That's if you're about to get married, things to consider. We've already talked about estate planning. Please know that if you are married, you've got to file your taxes jointly. There's married filing separately and married filing jointly, but you have to file your taxes together. So I talked to lots of people who haven't been doing that, and they just are like, oh no, we're just filing separately, but you have to disclose to the IRS that you're married. There's a marriage penalty. There's also a marriage bonus. It depends on your financial situation. So you want to see an accountant and run those numbers, especially before you get married, because you may be very shocked if you have a marriage penalty, and that makes marriage very uncute. I talked a little bit about parenting, so we can fast forward through that. I mentioned that your spouse has automatic rights if to your retirement plan. So you want to actually list your spouse. If you want your spouse to inherit your retirement plan, you want to list them as that. You don't want them to inherit your retirement plan. You want to do a or in Florida, you can also do a postnuptial agreement. If you own property together with your spouse, you're going to want to do, you might want to retitle it. So in other words, my wife and I owned our condo with rights of survivorship. And then when we married, we retitled it as spouses so that we have added protection against the claims of creditors by owning it as a married couple or tenants by the entireties. So this was what I wanted to mention. Social Security and other government benefits. Really, really important to make sure that you are aware of the benefits that Shelly mentioned, that even if you are not married for long enough, that you can still collect Social Security survivor benefits from your partner if you didn't have a chance to marry. And then next slide, Alex. The other thing that I want folks to know is, sorry, it's not exactly on here, but you could be disqualified from government benefits if your household income disqualifies you from them. If you get married and your household income goes higher as a result of that marriage, you could get thrown off of certain government benefits because they're means tested. They look at your household income. So it's really important to make sure that you understand that. Please know that, let's see, I think I'm running out of time. So I'm gonna, I think I did, it didn't, 12 seconds. Oh, I'm so good. Okay. I'm going to skip to the divorce piece of it because I think that's the most important here. You can read the rest of that. Yes, on some level, marriage is marriage, divorce is divorce, but very important to understand that for the most part, dividing up of assets and spousal support is done based on the length of marriage. So many of us we're with our partners for many decades and then have only been married a certain period of time, right? As I mentioned, I'm together with my wife 20 years. We married after the Windsor case, we married in 2013. And so 2013? Yeah, I think so. Anyway, we're in a long-term relationship, but like a short-term marriage under the law of many states. So it's important if you were to want to divide up your assets in some different way, other than like based on the length of your marriage, that you might need an agreement to modify that. And let me just explain a teensy bit what I mean, so I don't want to run too much over. The way that alimony gets awarded, the way that assets are divided, it'll be based on your marriage. If your marriage is short, but you would want to make sure that in fairness that she gets half the house going back to the 20 years that we've been paying the mortgage together, then you might have a prenup that looks a little different than that standard prenup of what's mine is mine, what's hers is hers, that kind of thing. So I just want to kind of flag that because I think it's something that a lot of people don't think about. They think of prenups as a one-size-fits-all, or postnups, again, postnuptial agreement being an after you married agreement. I think people think of that as one size fits all, but anytime you're modifying the defaults in the law, you want to have that in writing, and you want to have it properly signed and done by a lawyer that knows what they're doing, that kind of thing. So I think I'm going to wrap up from here. I'm happy to stick around, answer any questions. Sorry I had to go through so fast and cover so much, but I know you're all smart cookies and you're thinking this whole thing through. So thanks, Alex, for navigating those slides for me, and thanks for your attention today. Really, really appreciate it. So, thanks.
Thank you, Liz. Now we're going to hear from Amity Overall-Labe. She is the director of the National Long-Term Care Ombudsman Resource Center and will offer important information about preparing for your long-term care needs and the rights you have and how to protect them. Amity, it's all yours.
Hi, everyone. So glad to be here today. Excellent information, Shelly and Liz. Thank you so much. So next slide, please. Thanks, Alex. A little bit about the National Long-Term Care Ombudsman Resource Center, or NORC, as you'll hear me refer to it. We are funded by a federal grant from the Administration for Community Living and operated by the National Consumer Voice for Quality Long-Term Care, also known as Consumer Voice, which you'll hear about later as well, in cooperation with advancing states. We provide training, technical assistance, other support to state ombudsmen, as well as their program representatives across the country. Next slide, please. Due to, one back, thank you, one with the image, perfect. Due to time and the purpose of this presentation, I'm only providing a very high-level overview of 5 key topics. I'd like you to walk away today with a basic knowledge of these topics and where to go for more information. The 5 topics are: you have options and long-term services and supports, you have tools to help find quality affirming care, you have rights, you have an advocate, and you have resources. For our first topic, you have options and long-term services and supports. I'll provide a brief overview of what those options are and how to pay for them. The term long-term services and supports describes a range of services for older adults and people with disabilities. Services and supports are provided to help people live as independently as possible by assisting with healthcare needs and activities of daily living, and ideally receive care where they want to receive care. Care and services are provided in a variety of settings, such as their own home, community-based settings, residential care communities, and nursing facilities. Long-term care facilities, such as residential care communities and nursing facilities, provide a variety of supports and services, and those depend upon the facility's certification or license, which I'll talk about. Next slide. There are a variety of ways in which services and supports are paid for or supplemented. Some individuals may pay out of pocket, meaning their private funds and income, and others may rely on government payer sources to cover all or at least part of their care. Examples of resident funds include the resident's income, such as Social Security, pensions, other funds, and/or insurance. And government payer sources that I'm talking about today are specific to long-term services and supports. So for example, when I say Medicaid, Medicaid actually provides health coverage to millions of Americans, including eligible low-income individuals, children, and pregnant women. But for this discussion today, we're focusing on Medicaid coverage for long-term services. Slide. Veterans. If you're a veteran, you may be eligible for services through federal or state, or both, Veterans Affairs benefits. Some veterans can receive nursing and medical care, physical therapy, help with activities of daily living, otherwise called ADLs, pain management, and so on. These services can be provided in a variety of settings, such as residential care communities, nursing facilities, day centers, and at home. So if you're a veteran, contact the VA if you haven't already to discuss potential benefits and services. Next slide. Thanks, Alex. Medicare and Medicaid are both public insurance programs that help cover the cost of medical care. I think most folks know at least the basics of Medicare, and I'm going to talk about those, but oftentimes they may think that Medicare actually pays for more long-term care than it does. So Medicare is a health insurance program for people 65 years of age or older, or age 64 and younger with certain disabilities or illnesses. It does help with the cost of healthcare, but it does not cover all medical expenses or the cost of most long-term care. So specifically, Medicare covers skilled care in a nursing facility after the individual had a qualifying stay in a hospital and meets other criteria. Also, Medicare benefits may pay towards skilled care for up to 100 days, but days 21 through 100, Medicare pays 80%, and the individual pays for 20% of skilled care. So those are just important nuggets to keep in mind when you're thinking about paying for long-term care. Medicaid is the most common payer source for nursing facility residents. Medicaid eligibility requirements for nursing facility care is based on income and level of needs, and it's determined by each state. Medicare covers room and board, as well as the cost of services and support in certified nursing facilities after the resident's income sources and insurance have been exhausted. So in essence, it's a payer of last resort. Next slide. Now, I'm not going to get into this deeply, and I will make sure that you have my slides as well, because I think some of the images on my version are a little different than the ones that you're seeing right now, but that is okay. You still have the content. But HCBS is pretty complicated, but to give you a basic information about it, home and community-based services, also called HCBS, are a Medicaid state plan option that allows states to provide services to individuals eligible for Medicaid in their own home. So basically, you qualify for Medicaid level paid nursing home care, but you can get a Medicaid waiver to receive those services in your home. So it's a less institutional setting. Next slide. Skilled nursing facilities or nursing facilities are certified facilities that provide skilled nursing care for residents who require medical or nursing care rehab. These facilities also provide health care and services to individuals who, because of their mental or physical condition, require care and services above level of room and board, which can be made available through only these institutional facilities. And again, they're certified by Medicare and Medicaid. Nursing facilities must be licensed by individual states and certified as a nursing facility, skilled nursing facility, or both, in order to participate in Medicare and Medicaid. Federal law and regulations govern skilled nursing facilities or nursing facilities. State law and regulation governs a very few nursing facilities that do not accept federal funds and don't operate under a Medicare and Medicaid contract. But again, most nursing facilities are what we call duly certified for Medicare and Medicaid. Next slide. So what is skilled care exactly? Very simply put, skilled care is usually short-term and can only be performed by a skilled or licensed professional, such as a registered nurse or a physical therapist. Residents may have a short stay in a skilled nursing facility as part of their Medicare benefit, and then they may return home. However, some may stay in that nursing facility for long-term care. And that long-term care is because they need continuous care needs that may require both skilled care as well as assistance with activities of daily living, such as bathing, grooming, assistance with walking and exercise, and medication management. Next slide. Residential care community. That is a really broad term that is an umbrella term for a lot of different types of settings. But basically, it's a type of long-term care facility that provides at a minimum room and board, around-the-clock on-site supervision, and help with personal care. So not necessarily medical care, personal care such as bathing, dressing, and medication management. Those facility types include what you're probably familiar with, what's called assisted living or board and care homes, housing, other housing programs, personal care homes, and so on. There are not federal laws and regulations specifically for this type of setting. It's all very state specific. So that's important to remember when you're thinking about your rights. Next slide. So I wanted to leave you with, and I'm not going to go through all these resources because I know that you'll get these slides and you'll have the links as well as the phone numbers, but I wanted to give you some key resources that you can reach out to talk about and look into your long-term services and supports, both Florida resources as well as national resources. And they can walk you through paying for care as well. Next slide. So our next big topic is that you have tools to find affirming quality care. Next slide. As you begin to evaluate facilities, it's a good idea to do some homework before you visit any type of facility. And when I say homework, contact the Long-Term Care Ombudsman Program. They can provide information and assistance, let you know what facilities are in your area, as well as help you find those federal and state inspection and complaint information reports. Determine the cost of care and how you'll pay for it. Review the federal and state inspection and complaint investigation reports that I just mentioned. Visit the SAGE website for information about their LGBTQ+ elder housing initiative and their LTC Equality Index that you heard briefly about earlier. And once you've gathered that information, visit the facilities that you're considering, as that will provide you with some very important insights. Some issues to consider when evaluating facilities include quality of care and life, bed availability, provision of services that you may need, cost, location. You want to make sure that your friends and family can visit in often. And of course, when you're visiting that facility, speak with residents and their family members that you see and see what they say about the facility as well. So this fact sheet, go back one, please. Thank you. This fact sheet provides some additional considerations when visiting a nursing facility specifically. For example, when a resident asks for assistance or rings the call light, which you likely would be able to see in the hallway, is there a quick response? Do they knock on the door when they respond in order to respect privacy? Do the meals look appetizing? Is the environment clean? Is it noisy or quiet, home-like and comfortable? Do the residents seem engaged, comfortable or happy? And likely, most importantly, because sometimes as a previous ombudsman, I would visit facilities that maybe didn't look very modern or nice, but the care that those residents received, it was like they were in their own home. So watch the interaction between staff and residents. Do the staff seem to know the residents and enjoy being with them and vice versa? Next slide. Checking my time. This guide provides excellent information to help you find an LGBTQ+ inclusive long-term care community. I encourage you to visit the website and download it. It walks you through some very key items to look for and questions to ask, including about asking if there's a resident non-discrimination policy. And if there is one, does the policy include LGBTQ+ identities and or mention sexual orientation and or gender identity? Is there an equal visitation policy, and so forth? It is an excellent tool to help you find a facility that will meet your needs. Next slide. This resource is a fillable PDF, and we have an example on the website as well to walk you through what it could look like. This will help you share what's important to you about your daily routine, your preferences. You can complete it and share it with any of your care providers, whether it's in your own home or in a facility, to help ensure quality, individualized, person-centered care. And it's completely free. Next slide. So our next topic is you have rights. Next slide. Laws and regulations for long-term care settings vary, as I mentioned earlier. For simplicity, I'm only going to refer to federal laws and regs that are applicable only to nursing facilities that accept Medicaid and Medicare. As I mentioned earlier, RCCs do not have any federal requirements, so you need to refer to your state laws and regulations for those. Next slide. Individuals living in nursing homes have the same rights to be free from discrimination and harassment as individuals living in the larger community. In addition, they actually have rights and protections above and beyond individuals in the community because they are provided with federal nursing facility regulations and state and federal anti-discrimination provisions. The rights of all residents should be honored and respected. Understanding your rights, learning about ways to solve problems, and knowing how to get help if issues arise is the first step in ensuring quality care. So this resource reviews key resident rights and provides examples such as the right to be free from abuse. Resident mistreatment includes all types of abuse, such as verbal, sexual, mental, and physical abuse, neglect, and financial exploitation. For example, facility staff cannot refuse to provide care due to a resident's sexual orientation, nor can staff harass a resident due to his or her gender identity. Next slide. So about those rights, one of them is that you have access to an advocate. An ombudsman is a Swedish word meaning an agent, representative, or someone who speaks on behalf of another. Representatives of the ombudsman program are advocate ombudsmen. Next slide. First and foremost, the ombudsman program advocates for the quality of life and care of residents in nursing facilities, residential care communities, and other similar adult care homes. And in some states, they advocate for care that individuals receive in their own home. And they are resident advocates. The Ombudsman program educates individuals on resident rights and advocates with and for residents to ensure those rights are honored and respected. The Ombudsman program can play an important role in helping people restore their sense of self and regain their personal power and voice. Next slide. Responsibilities of the program include identifying and investigating and resolving complaints made by or on behalf of residents, educating consumers about resident rights, good care practices and other related topics, providing information to the public regarding policy issues and resident rights, educating providers about resident rights and good care practices, and even providing training to those providers, developing resident and family councils, providing support to those councils, and advocating for improvements in the entire long-term care systems, otherwise known as systems advocacy. Next slide. The Ombudsman program, as resident-centered advocates, they are directed by resident goals for complaint resolution, and federal disclosure requirements preclude them from sharing information about a complaint unless the resident provides consent. If the resident cannot provide consent, then they'll work with the resident's legal representative. They do not conduct licensing and regulatory inspections or investigations. That is the state survey agency that does that. They do not act as the official finder of fact in investigations of abuse, neglect, or exploitation, meaning they will investigate allegations of abuse, but from the perspective of the resident and what outcome the resident wants. If the resident wants them to report it to APS or the state survey agency and or law enforcement, then the Ombudsman program will support the resident in doing so. But the Ombudsman program themselves are not mandatory reporters because they cannot take action unless they have consent. Or if the resident can't consent, they work with their legal representative. If they can't consent, there's no legal rep, then they follow state Ombudsman program policies and procedures. I know that's a lot, but I just have to say that. And obviously they provide training to providers, but they do not provide direct care for residents. Next slide. The Ombudsman program serves anyone, regardless of age, living in a long-term care facility. And as I mentioned already, they are guided by resident directions. Next slide. Who represents the Ombudsman program? Each state has an office of the state long-term care ombudsman, and it's headed by a full-time state long-term care ombudsman who directs the program statewide. They ensure that program representatives fulfill the program requirements, and they designate those volunteers and paid representatives. Across the nation, staff and thousands of volunteers are designated by the state ombudsman to serve residents. Next slide. And I'm not going to get into this because for the sake of time, I have about 3 minutes to run through resources. But the gist is that nationwide in 2020, they investigated 150,000 complaints. And that number actually is less than previous years simply because of the pandemic effect, which I'm sure you're well aware of just by media coverage, that nursing facilities did not have any visitors for a very long time, including outside support services like the Ombudsman program. And so they were handling complaints by phone and by video very differently and doing window visits. And it was really hard. And that's one reason there were fewer complaints that year than the year before. But it's important to remember that not all complaints are actually about the facility. Some complaints are about outside services and supports as well. So the Ombudsman program actually deals with a whole lot of issues. Next slide. So how can you contact the Ombudsman program? We have a map on our website. The link is right there. Feel free to click that link and find your state program as well as your local program. If you have one in your state, I have the Florida contact information on an upcoming slide. Next slide. So my final topic today is that you have resources. And again, these are not all the resources because there's a whole lot, but these are the key resources that I'd encourage you to reach out to. Next slide. First and foremost, of course, the Florida Ombudsman Program. I have their website as well as their phone number and their email address. I encourage you, if you are at the very beginning at looking at long-term care options, to reach out to them. As I mentioned earlier, one of their jobs is to provide information and assistance and educate the public. So that is one of those things. And since they're out in these facilities conducting visits, they're very familiar with the facilities in your community. But to put a little precursor to that, when you call them, because of conflict of interest, I hope you understand the Ombudsman program can't refer you to a specific facility, but they can provide you with what they observe when they're there, if that facility resolves complaints quickly, what type of complaints come in, where to find the state survey information for that facility, and so on. So they can't refer you to a specific facility, but they'll answer a lot of your questions and provide you a lot of background information. Next slide. These are other resources. As you all know, if you're here, the Area Agencies on Aging are an excellent resource. So reach out to them about, they have benefits counselors, they know the services in your area and in your state. Next slide. These are some national resources, including our website and SAGE. And then last but not least, I'm sorry, I have a very yappy cat that's trying to get out my door. Last but not least, our host agency that hosts NORC, the National Consumer Voice for Quality Long-Term Care. If you have not visited their website, I strongly encourage you to do so. They are an advocacy organization specifically for people receiving long-term care regardless of where they live. So nursing facilities, residential care, and in their own home. They were started as a grassroots entity 45 years ago, and they provide a wealth of free information to consumers, including those fact sheets on those topics, many, many guides, and support for resident and family councils. And last but not least, I think there's one more. Great. Yes, here is our contact information. We are also on social media, Facebook, Twitter, and we even have an app, but that's primarily for ombudsmen because it provides resources when they're in the field. So in closing today, I hope you leave knowing that you have options for long-term services and support. You have tools to help you find quality affirming care. You have rights, you have an advocate, and as you can see, you have many, many resources. So thank you again for being here and for your time today. And I think I'm only a minute over, so not too bad. Thank you.
You did great, Amity. Thank you so much. And Elizabeth has joined us. Shelly has joined us. We're now entering our Q&A portion of the program, and we would love for anyone that has questions to go ahead and send them in through the chat. We do have a couple of questions that have come in during the presentation today, so we'll get started with those. And I believe this first question looks like it's probably going to be best for Liz to answer for us. So Liz, this question is, if my wife and I created a will and a living will prior to marriage, do we need to see a lawyer again to update these documents, or are they still good?
That's a great question. You probably don't need to make any changes unless for some reason, I mean, I might have a lawyer just eyeball it because sometimes people craft funny things in wills and then you'd want to change it. But for the most part, any lawyer who knew what they were doing would say, you know, I give everything to my partner, Cheryl. And if my partner, Cheryl, has now become my wife, Cheryl still gets it no matter what. So you shouldn't need to redo it. But it's funny, as you started reading the question, Cheryl, I was imagining what the question was, which is a little different. So I'm going to answer the question that I thought it was, because a lot of people do have this question, which is, I did my my living will before we moved to Florida, so not before we married, and would those need to be changed, right? And we're the 6th borough down here in South Florida, so we've got a lot of folks who come from elsewhere, and so the answer to that question is you shouldn't need to redo your will. That we have a statute in Florida that says that if your will was validly executed according to the law wherever you signed it, then it's valid here. So for example, let's say you signed it in a jurisdiction where they don't need a notary, but they need 3 witnesses. And in Florida, we need 2 witnesses and a notary. So we would just submit the law of that other state, if heaven forbid you passed away, to show that that will was valid. So you shouldn't need to redo your will or your trust, same concept with validity. But very often we do suggest that folks redo those advanced directives, the living will, the healthcare surrogate, because those are very different in different jurisdictions. And kind of to my point earlier, the last thing you want, if you've got a healthcare power of attorney and you're showing up in the hospital to care for your bestie, and the nurse is like, oh, here it's a healthcare surrogate. The last thing you want to try to do is reason with the person. It's the same. Look at what it says. It's the same thing, because they're not gonna have that kind of comfort to the, the healthcare provider is not going to usually exercise that kind of discretion. So you do want to have those advanced directives redone, not to mention lots of times people's contact info changes. And I hope that you have on your advanced directives, people's addresses and phone numbers and emails, because the nurses will send an email, they will make a phone call. So it's a good idea to, yes, thank you for your applause, Shelly. Good idea to revisit those to make sure that the contact information is current. So that's the answer to your question and the question you didn't ask.
No, that's great. Thank you.
Sure.
And Shelly, it looks like the next question is maybe one that you could take for us. And Liz, feel free to stay on, and Amity, feel free to join us again on screen if you'd like. So this question is, could you define the term BIPOC? I know you used that a couple of times, Shelly, and if you could maybe just share again what that stands for.
Yeah, sure. It's people, so people who are Black, Indigenous, or people of color, and that it's an umbrella term nowadays for folks who identify within any of those groups.
Very good, thank you. Another follow-up question, and all of you can feel free to join in on this one. This came from a viewer who's with us today from Michigan, and they wanted to know if these resources are available in other states. So maybe Lambda Legal and the Ombudsman, if you all can talk about the resources available in other states. And then Liz, if you know of where folks can contact legal assistance, that'd be great too.
I'll let Amity go first.
Thanks, Shelly. Hi. Yes, thanks for joining from Michigan. The Ombudsman program, there definitely is one in Michigan, and you can go to that slide with the link, and I can't drop it in the chat because I have access to it, and find our map and just click on Michigan, and you'll see the state office as well as any local contacts. So please don't hesitate to reach out to them. And reach out to me if you can't find something on our website.
This is Shelly. So go to our help desk, and then we have, for each state, we have specific information. So first, let me say, go to our help desk for state-specific information. We have more general information on our website as a whole. And then the last thing I would say is, just like Amity said, feel free to reach out to me directly if you're not finding or getting what you need. More than happy to point you in the right direction.
And I'll just add, the National LGBTQ Bar Association has a really wonderful, vetted group of lawyers who work with LGBTQ individuals and couples. And I can't send a chat to the whole group, but I just sent a link to the directory to Andrea Spencer from ElderSource, who hopefully will be able to share it with you all. But there are a couple of great attorneys from Michigan and lots of folks. I apologize. I assumed that everybody was in Florida, so I shouldn't have assumed that. But there are lawyers all over the place, and I think Andrea later is going to share my contact info. And I'm pretty well connected, so anyone who needs somebody elsewhere, I'm happy to try to direct you to the right place if there's not someone in that little list. Thank you, Andrea, for sharing it.
And Cheryl, also, just for everyone to be aware, there are area agencies on aging and aging and disability resources in every state in the country. We're part of a large network of over 620 plus area agencies on aging. So anyone looking for an area agency on aging in their area, they could go to the Elder Care Locator, and we'll put that link in the chat as well. Or you could call our office and we'll connect you to any area agency that's closest to you wherever you live.
Thank you so much, Linda. I was just going to say that's an important reminder. Whenever an LGBTQ older person or caregiver contacts me for resources, one of the first things I say is, have you contacted your area agency on aging? Because they really are the connector to our aging network across the country. Shelly and Amity, I think you both had other comments.
I was just going to say that I'm glad you brought that up, Linda. I breezed through my slides so quickly, but on the resource slides, when I talk about national, I included the Elder Care Locator link and phone number as well for that very reason. That's a great place to just start.
And I believe Andrea has been dropping some of these links in the chat. So if you click on it, they'll pop up now, but again, they'll be available on our website along with other materials and will be sent out to you after this presentation.
One more avenue, if you want more of a hands-on approach and you are in a city where there is an LGBT center. So many cities have LGBT centers. Dallas has one, Chicago has one. I think there are definitely some in Florida. And so that's also a great place to go see a person and be with them and get some of that information that you need.
I have another question for Amity. For the long-term care ombudsman, we talked a lot about nursing homes and residents living in a nursing home facility. What about assisted living?
Thanks. Good question, and one we receive often. The only reason I focused on nursing facilities is because they're the only ones with federal requirements. So since the focus was resident rights, that's why I focused on them. But yes, ombudsman programs since 1981 have been required to go into visit, advocate for, work with residents in residential care communities, otherwise known as assisted living. So yes, they are out there in those facilities as well, and they should be very familiar with them. That said, and without getting into a lot of the specifics, there are a lot more residential care communities across the country than there are nursing facilities. And so in the data across the country, you'll see that ombudsman programs more frequently visit nursing facilities than they do residential care. And that's simply because of not having enough resources, not having enough funding to adequately visit and check on all those facilities, and not having enough people. So that being said, the ombudsman program also has a volunteer component to it. So I'm going to put a plug in there for volunteering. If it moves you to be an advocate for people in long-term care settings, I strongly encourage you to reach out to the Florida program or Michigan, wherever you're listening in today. Due to COVID, we already had a decline in volunteers before the pandemic, but as you can imagine, they've lost at least, at last I looked, almost 40%, and donating only half as many hours to the program in the last year. So desperate need for representation of folks' needs.
We thank you, Amity, for that. We have one other important question that I would like probably Shelly and Liz to respond to, just the best that you can, because I think this is a question that's on the minds of a lot of LGBTQ people right now. Any thoughts on things we can do proactively to shield ourselves financially if the Supreme Court should decide to take away marriage equality.
Let me let Elizabeth go first.
Yeah, I mean, well, first of all, I just want to say I don't think that's going to happen. I mean, we could talk about how abortion has been sort of described as very different from marriage equality, and I also think this court is like Gorsuch and Roberts are like obsessed with corporations, and I think corporations would like freak the F out if we went back to this patchwork of rights that we had, where you'd travel across different jurisdictions and you're married and now you're civil union and now you're domestic partner and now you're nothing and you're legal strangers. Anyway, so I don't think that that's actually going to happen. And again, not the question you asked, but just answering it anyway. But please do your estate plans. It's so important. And frankly, if you were thinking of getting married, it's a good idea to go ahead and pull the trigger. Study up before you do. But if you decide to do it and you've been putting it off, I think it's a good idea. You know, heaven forbid I'm wrong. It has been known to happen once or twice. Don't tell my wife. I would say that you'd want to be sort of grandmothered in with your marriage. But just really important to have all of those estate plan documents, your will, your advance directives, your powers of attorney, have those updated, have those be, as I say, current, have them be compliant with the jurisdiction in which you live, okay? Office Depot, LegalZoom, that's not the answer. Respectfully, it's just not. So, so have updated statutory, state compliant documents, and if you're thinking about getting married, do it. But I think you're going to be okay no matter what. Let me say that.
So let me add to that. So a couple things. Let me go practical first. Make sure that your beneficiary designations, which Liz just said, but I'm going to say it again, are up to date and are what you want. Also, many financial institutions, whether it's Chase, Bank of America, Charles Schwab, they also allow you to do powers of attorney for individual accounts that you may have at that financial institution. So I would also, in addition to a durable power of attorney that is typically a broad document that looks at things like Liz talked about, transferring assets, transferring property, at least what I tell folks is go and make sure that you have a power of attorney on file with that particular financial institution that they recognize, because that means then you will be much easier to deal with that specific account. So that would be one thing that I would say that can help you. And then I think if you're in a state like Texas, or even, and I hope Elizabeth is wrong, but I'm in Texas, right? And I'm watching everything that's happening in Florida. I'm working on legislative sessions. And I can tell you here that if whatever Texas can do to reinstitute its same-sex marriage bans, because Texas was one of 13 states that at the time of the marriage equality decision still did not recognize same-sex marriage. It was in our statute, it's against public policy. It may be, and we're seeing questions surrounding that going to our Attorney General right now with respect to how do folks who are in same-sex marriages, how are they going to be treated under the law? How are they going to be treated in public accommodations? And so I think I think Liz is right, and I'm putting that intention out in the world that nothing bad is going to happen. But I think definitely go get your estate plan, do a will.
So if I heard you right, do your estate planning and have a will. Thank you. Linda, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thanks, Cheryl. And thank you, Liz and Shelly and Amity, for your presentations today. There was so much information, and we know you probably have a plethora of more information that you could share. So we're going to put resources on our websites and send stuff out to you. So be sure to go to our websites. We want to thank again the LGBTQ Community Fund for Northeast Florida at the Community Foundation for Northeast Florida. We want to remind everybody that this session has been recorded, and it will be available again tonight at 5:30, and also on our website at myeldersource.org and our YouTube channel. And I believe also Sage will be having it available if you go to their website. We have more sessions to come with lots of more good information for you. So our next one is Effective Caregiving Part 1. There are 2 parts to our caregiving sessions. The first one is on June 21st, same time, 11:30 to 1. And you can pre-register for that at myeldersource.org. So thank you again to our speakers. Thank you again to all of you who took the time out today to join us, to our funders, and to Cheryl and Sage for partnering with us on this important work. Thank you all.
Thank you, everyone.